tell me something that either of these two individuals have done, because I'll tell you what Ralph Nader has done in the last 37 years. Because of Ralph Nader, the most qualified person on the ballot this Tuesday, we have the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Environmental Protection Agency, airbags, seatbelts, the Mine Safety Act, the Freedom of Information Act. That is what Ralph Nader has given us. That is what we have from Ralph Nader. And we owe him a debt of our gratitude and thanks. Let's go out there. Let's go out there. Let's go out there on Tuesday. Let's call our friends tonight. Let's send some emails. Let's get the vote out on Tuesday, because it will send a loud message on Tuesday to whoever sits in that Oval Office that there are millions of us that do not like what's going on. We want a country that is fair and just for all the people, not just the upper 30% or the upper 1%. We want to be a country where we vote our conscience. And as we look at the presidents that are carved on Mount Rushmore, think about this. Up on Mount Rushmore, there sit these 4 presidents, and not a single one of them, at some point, they all rejected the corruption of this so-called two-party system. Abraham Lincoln won as a third-party candidate. Thomas Jefferson won in a very close 3-way race. George Washington didn't even believe in political parties, didn't even belong to one. And Teddy Roosevelt, after having been a Republican, rejected that, started the Progressive Party, and came in second, beating the Republicans. That's who's on Mount Rushmore. That's who's on Mount Rushmore. We admire that, don't we? Let's admire it on Tuesday. Thank you, Ralph Nader, for doing this. Thank you for being this incredible thorn in the side of our political system. Because if you hadn't done this, Ralph, for the last few weeks, we never would have heard about corporate welfare or corporate criminals or all the other things that you've been able to talk about in the media that was ignoring you. What's the old Gandhi quote? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our good friend, Ralph Nader.
This is really great. Thank you. What a great District of Columbia welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. Okay, let's go. Thank you. Thank you. Well, when Winona LaDuke started this campaign, we wanted to welcome everybody to what we called the politics of joy and justice, and we wanted to culminate this presidential campaign right back to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. This is the latest and the last of the giant super rallies where people from cities and suburbs and rural areas all over the country came to participate and support a campaign of political reform, a campaign that celebrates a new birth of freedom and justice, the freedom to participate in power and the justice to pursue in the only authentic way, to pursue happiness. It requires justice to pursue happiness. But I want to take this occasion to start my remarks by focusing on the plight of the people in the District of Columbia. This situation is no longer going to be a footnote in presidential campaigns, no longer going to be a photo opportunity for politicians. More than 500,000 people live in the District of Columbia. As the capital of the United States of America, the district is supposed to be the symbol of the freedoms for which this nation stands. The light of democracy is supposed to shine from the District of Columbia, but it does not illuminate this city. The core is hollow. The values of equality and political participation that the city is promised are denied right here in our nation's capital. Most Americans and many people abroad do not know, and they would find it hard to believe, that under our current system of disenfranchisement, D.C. residents are second-class citizens. The district is denied local control. Congress must approve the district's budget and can override any action of the city government. At the same time, district residents do not have even one voting representative in the Congress which controls the minutiae of their lives. The District of Columbia is effectively a colony with all local decisions directly subject to change by a Congress largely out of touch with local realities. If there's ever a rationale for the Green Party in the District of Columbia, it's based on the following. Al Gore has supported D.C. statehood in the past, but for the last 10 years has been utterly silent on the issue. George W. Bush is on record opposing District of Columbia statehood. Here's an important issue involving the democratic rights of 500,000 people, and yet there's been no debate whatsoever, and most Americans are unaware of the issues involved. Most people who live outside the district do not know that district citizens pay about $2 billion a year in federal income taxes, more than several states, yet cannot elect people to decide how their money is spent. District of Columbia residents have served and died in our armed forces over the last half-century in disproportionately high numbers, but have no representation in the Congress that decides whether or not to go to war. The United States is the only democracy in the entire world that deprives the residents of its capital city the basic rights granted to all other citizens. And I hope the foreign press here communicates that around the world, and I hope the domestic press here communicates that around the world as well. We want D.C. statehood. Unaccountable power is by its nature abusive. The places where unaccountable power is exercised are and must be dysfunctional. Unaccountable power is uninformed. Most members of Congress don't know about this city. I campaigned in Anacostia a few weeks ago, and I saw the TV report of it. The Washington Post didn't report it, of course. I saw the TV report, and they said I was the first presidential candidate ever to campaign in Anacostia. Isn't that a shame? Isn't that a shame for all other presidential candidates? I was in Ward 8. 65,000 people live in Ward 8. They don't have a single supermarket to buy their food from. They have to go to Maryland or far from Ward 8. This is just illustrative of the deprivations here. The District of Columbia has double the infant mortality of the rest of the country. It has a poverty rate that's about 1 every 3 children in this district grow up in poverty. There are conditions here that should never be tolerated. But then the District of Columbia is a colony, and people around the world understand what colonies are. Most members of Congress don't feel what the District of Columbia people feel. They approve the budget and all the legislation, but they don't have to live with their decisions, these members of Congress. They foist pet projects on citizens who are perfectly capable of deciding these issues locally. They prevent the district from taxing income where it is earned. They regularly overturn the judgment of local elected officials on public health, tax, budget, school issues, all with impunity. And here's what unaccountable really does when it's unaccountable power. It chokes the ability and destroys the responsibility of people to govern themselves. There's no place in the world where second-class citizens live side by side with first-class citizens and fare as well. It just doesn't happen. What happens to a community where the people cannot exercise authority, where there is no democracy? People start participating. They don't run for local offices. The civic culture of the community withers away in the face of powerlessness. On September 16, 2000, I wrote a letter to President Clinton and Vice President Gore, and I said to them, I want to challenge you before you leave office to fill the MCI arena with DC citizens in support of statehood for the District of Columbia. We received no answer to that, but we filled this MCI arena on our own energy, and thank you all for doing that. We hear a lot about the difference between the two parties, and I do recognize there are a few major real differences between the two parties, but look what happens when they're rhetorically different, but not really different. The Democratic Party is for statehood, the Republican Party is against it. Republicans do not believe the district residents should have the right to full local or self-determination, and they don't intend to do anything about the current situation. Democrats do believe that district residents have the right to local control, and they also intend not to do anything about the current situation. On behalf of the Green Party, the District of Columbia, and our candidacy, we pledge to you that we're going to make this an issue in succeeding months, more and more intensified, deeper, broader, taking it across the country and putting the heat on Congress until justice is done for this community. On to the major issues now around the country and the world. In a real sense, the efforts of tens of thousands of high expectation Americans who have worked on this campaign in so many diverse capacities have brought the rising political reform movement to the takeoff stage. when on November 7th, millions of voters will establish the third largest party in America by size and the first party in America in its determined spirit to establish the reign of the people over this country, not the reign of giant corporations over our government and political economy. This week, on Tuesday, Election Day, millions of independent-minded voters will invest their conscience, their hopes, their dreams, their interests, and the interests of their descendants in making the Green Party a party of, by, and for the people so that it can move to make our government a government of, by, and for the people in reality. For this effort, a deliberative democracy is required. A democracy where people spend more time every week, every month, every year on their civic responsibilities and their political duties as they see them. People must spend more time on democracy to make it work. They must spend more time if they are going to allow themselves to apply their talents and their skills and their vision and their foresight. The only place where democracy comes before work, one might add, is in the dictionary. A few weeks ago, Business Week magazine had a wonderful cover on too much corporate power over all aspects of our lives. And they detailed it in page after page. And then in an editorial, they said something extraordinary. This is a major magazine full of ads by big corporations. Think of the courage it took. They concluded that corporations have so much power that, quote, corporations should get out of politics, end quote, is what Business Week magazine said. Corporations should get out of politics. I found Business Week magazine more courageous, more forthright, and more progressive than the Democratic Party, not to mention the Republican Party. Corporations are not people, and in the words of our forebears who established the laws that chartered corporations as artificial persons, in their words, corporations were designed to be our servants, not our masters. And we must reassert the vision of our forebears in that respect. Elections are for real people, not artificial entities like corporations, full of massive power and massive money, driven overwhelmingly by their own commercial motives. Our campaign has striven to move the political edge using tax dollars for corporate welfare, such as subsidies to giant agribusinesses that are starving small farmer incomes and creating incredible distress in rural America. Companies like ADM and Cargill and others who have had their hand in the trough here in Washington for all too long. We want a redirection of subsidies that now go to the giant drug companies in the form of taxpayer-funded drug research, leading to the discovery and testing of Taxol and AZT and all kinds of other significant pharmaceutical products that under our government's policy is given away free to a drug company under a monopoly marketing agreement that turns around and charges thousands and thousands of dollars per patient for a set of treatments, like $14,000 to a woman with ovarian cancer for the drug Taxol by Bristol Myers Squibb that didn't spend a cent discovering and testing it. Your tax dollars did. This must be ended. Corporate welfare subsidies that involve giveaways of our precious natural resources around the country on public lands. You know, we're the only country in the world that gives away its gold, its silver, its copper, and other hard rock metals like molybdenum. The only country in the world that gives it away because of an 1872 mining act. And foreign and domestic companies can come on our land, discover gold, as a Canadian company did, document $9 billion worth of gold, take it to the Department of Interior here in Washington, and they get it for $5 an acre. And they wanted so many acres, and they got title ownership to $9 billion a year gold for $30,000. This is corporate welfare run amok, and we got to put a stop to it. The Green Party stands for an end to selling our great trees in the national forest for a pittance. No more commercial logging on our national forest. We want our children and grandchildren, their descendants, to enjoy our pristine national forest, not to inherit a bunch of tree stumps. And by the way, spending $1 billion now that goes to the timber corporations, that's how much you subsidize them, $1.2 billion. You build the roads for them, you subsidize them. We put that money into restoring and preserving the national forest. It will create more jobs, provide more recreational and ecotourism, and proudly pass these forests on to future generations. Thank you. It is outrageous that you go to work every day and you pay your taxes every 2 weeks withheld, and it comes to Washington, and some of these taxes go to bail out bankers who are running their banks into the ground because of mismanagement and speculation. They go to defense contractors who set new records for cost overruns, as the Pentagon calls them. Waste, waste, waste. The golden handcuffs pumping up these weapon systems to fantastic levels. Weapon systems now in the pipeline costing us hundreds of billions of dollars that retired admirals and generals who don't go to work for the military contract business have said are unnecessary, wasteful, no strategic need. There is no more Soviet Union. There is no major enemy in the world. Exaggerating national emergencies in order to increase the military budget. That's General Douglas MacArthur. 3 years later, President Dwight Eisenhower, who knows a bit or two, knew a bit or two about the military. He warned about the encroachment of the military-industrial complex, and that meant the constant greasing of the wheels in Congress by the military contractors, now like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon and Grumman and Northrop, who are pushing the F-22s and the easily decoyable missile defense systems and more weapons to just make themselves more profitable, while our schools and clinics and drinking water systems and public transit are starving for the lack of public investment. We must stop. We must and can stop this corporate welfare binge that comes out of Washington, as if Washington now is pretty much just another bustling bazaar of accounts receivables for all these corporations who come here and say, gimme, 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 gimme. Well, the New York Stock Exchange wants to go on welfare. They want to build a new building in New York, so they shook down the mayor of New York for $500 million. This is the bastion of global capitalism, and we say we got to get this bastion off welfare and let it stand on its own 2 feet. There are one of the most profitable corporations in the world, the Intel Corporation. When they build a chip plant, they go dangling it in front of various cities and towns, say, how much are you going to bid? How many years are you going to give us no taxes to support municipal services? And they not only get what they want, but they burden the local community. Obviously, it grows, more demand for police, fire, educational, and other services. And here's this freeloading company whose profits are absolutely staggering, bringing these communities to their knees and eating up a lot of water in the process. Just imagine, if you will, perhaps the most outrageous corporate welfare subsidies to gambling casinos. Governor Whitman got together $200–300 million for a special highway spur in Atlantic City, feeding into a big gambling casino. You go around New Jersey, don't you think you could find better use for $200 million that meet the needs and necessities of the people in New Jersey? People are deprived in their necessities of life, in the facilities that are known as the public works, because of the diversion of these budgets into the coffers of rich and powerful corporations. Trillions of dollars have been diverted and misused by complex corporate welfare systems, rarely studied by our university students or scholars. Corporate welfare systems in the past 30 years, while politicians tell people there is no money for those necessities. There's no money for the urban crisis. There's no money for rural poverty. I might add that one man in the Republican Party has taken a stand against corporate welfare. His name is John Kasich, chairman of the House Budget Committee, who held the first hearings in American history on corporate welfare a couple years ago and tried to knock out some of these provisions, but his own leadership blocked him. Returning these tax dollars to human needs over corporate greed should be a priority for any political movement in this country who would serve the children of America and their parents and all people well, while telling big capitalists to stand on their own feet and stop funding Republicans and Democratic candidates and just agenda into the areas where too much concentration of wealth and power damage or destroy the legitimate interests and rights of the American people. And I might add, too many oppressed people all over the world. We stand for strong civil rights and civil liberties. Both of these are the pillars of our democracy, and both of them have been weakened by the current administration that uses florid oratory to camouflage a dismal dashing of expectations in these two areas of civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights and civil liberties apply to all people, but they are necessary to apply more intensively to the first Native Americans, to African Americans, to Hispanics, to women, to gay lesbians, and to the latest immigrants to our country, who by being the newest often are excoriated and discriminated against the most. And one group of immigrants is being subjected to recurrent ethnic profiling. And just like the Irish who came to America were discriminated against, and then it was the Jews who were discriminated against when they came, then it was the Italians. Now it's the turn of the Muslim people who come to this country. And this must also be subject to strong civil rights enforcement. The laws which were passed under the Clinton-Gore administration in the civil liberties area were atrocious. The use of secret evidence and other lack of due process against immigrants in this country is a scar on our nation's sense of equal justice under law and must be repealed. Our Constitution never envisioned that the INS would be a court of law. That's for another branch of government. Longtime defenders of civil liberties, and I mean long time, 30, 40 years, including Anthony Lewis, Nat Hentoff, and the almost century-old American Civil Liberties Union, have described the Clinton-Gore's administration's performance in civil liberties as, quote, abysmal, end quote. And while the Justice Department's litigation enforcement record in the area of affirmative action and against illegal police violence is so bad, the Justice Department lawyers have told us that in those two areas, the litigation enforcement record is as bad, if not worse, than Reagan-Bush. Only in anti-housing discrimination is the Justice Department under Clinton-Gore better than their predecessors. This is quite an astonishing elaboration, is it not? Because if we thought there was one area, in fact, that was different between the Republicans and Democrats, it was the area of civil rights, civil liberties. Not so. Not so. And that extends to both Gore and Bush being full out for the death penalty and not even for a moratorium, as the Republican governor of Illinois established. After Governor Ryan discovered that 11 death row inmates had been cleared by subsequent evidence before heading for execution, there would have been 11 executed, innocent people executed. He declared a moratorium, and that is not good enough for Al Gore and George W. Bush. In fact, the Clinton-Gore administration has extended the death penalty in federal laws to cover more and more areas. We're the only Western country that has the death penalty. The death penalty has been proven not to deter, and this country has been proven to be applied viciously to poor people and people of color who don't have competent lawyers to defend them. And if you don't have a competent lawyer to defend you, the risk of innocent people being executed is increased quite substantially. Also, for those who are interested in the economics, it costs more. It costs more to pursue a capital punishment case than to put a person in jail for life without parole after being convicted. We have brought a focus, the Green Party and their candidates, on the very lax enforcement regarding waves of systemic corporate crime, fraud, and abuse that is taking hundreds of billions of dollars from consumers, investors, taxpayers each year and endangering so many people's health and safety. These violations and deceptions reduce family incomes as if they were subjected to pay cuts at work. And when not stopped, these corporate criminal practices help drive out honest business practices through this unfair, unlawful competition that escapes law and order. Strong law and order with adequate enforcement resources should apply to these powerful companies. There should be no double standard as the corporate crime reporter says regularly, there should be no double standard between crime in the suites and crime in the streets. The documentation of corporate crime, fraud, and abuse comes from many fine reports on 60 Minutes, 2020, the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Time Magazine, and nothing happens. And when nothing happens, when reporters do their finest, and it's on page 1 or it's on the cover of Time Magazine, as a great report on corporate welfare was 2 years ago. When nothing happens, that means we have a collapsing democracy. We have a weak democracy and an excessively powerful plutocracy ruled by the rich and powerful. The system is out of balance. It's grossly out of balance. We have seen documented too many people who have died or been injured by dangerously defective automobiles, hazardous pharmaceuticals, flammable fabrics, asbestos, lead poisoning, toxics in the workplace, landfill dumps that leak and contaminate drinking water. Camp Lejeune now is in a turmoil for years and years. The men, women, and children in that military camp in North Carolina were drinking water that had been contaminated with a serious toxic chemical. All this is happening around the country. You travel around the country, and so many of our precious natural resources have been turned into corporate sewers, toxic sewers, producing respiratory ailments and cancer and genetic damage. This is corporate crime. This is the silent corporate criminal violence that needs 100,000 prosecutors for corporate crime prosecution. Thank you. Thank you. We urge a fundamental redirection of public taxpayer budgets, turning governments away from get-off welfare. This candidacy's policies on poverty, class, and racial inequities is a very strong one. No party has positions like the Green Party on this. Poverty, class, and racial inequities mark the nation's landscape and scar our national conscience daily. Imagine 1 out of every 5 children in poverty. In California, it's 1 out of every 4. And if you add a near poverty category, it's over 45%. Just imagine that. This is the richest country in the world. There are countries in Western Europe where poverty is 2–3%, and they're ashamed of it and want to do something about it. The philosopher Heidegger once said that the basic fact about human beings is that we care for one another. That's what distinguishes us from other species, he said. But beyond the extended family, caring in an ever more complex world requires hard work and willpower. These traits were displayed in the mid-20th century by several Western European governments when they essentially abolished poverty as we know it, providing their people with universal health care, child care, paid maternity and sick leave, paid 1-month vacation, public transit that works, and much easier rights to form trade unions to bargain for either higher living standards. And we say if these countries if these countries did it in the 50s and 60s, coming out of World War II and the rubble that some of their countries were reduced to, the United States of America can do it in the year 2000 if it is led by a progressive political reform movement from the grassroots all the way to Washington, D.C. Thank you. It is now the year 2000 AD. Poor people of color and other poor people still pay more, suffer more, are excluded discriminately in many, many ways, are imprisoned at hugely disproportionate rates, are racially profiled more and more, and die earlier than other people. And that is what discrimination and class distinctions do to tens of millions of hardworking Americans. And it's time to go beyond oratory. It's time to go beyond rhetoric, which the two parties are very good at, especially the Democratic Party. The phony phrases of compassionate conservatism, the phony phrases of Al Gore when he says, "I'll fight for you, not for the powerful." It's time to go beyond that, roll up our sleeves, and mobilize a movement that tells them what to do. Thank you. The legacy of slavery weighs heavily on America today. The Green Party believes that these critical tragedies, ironically in a period of economic boom and all kinds of civil rights laws on the books, demand policies that provide more neighborhood civic institutions and power to the downtrodden. They need policies that invite actively more political participation, which is a good definition of freedom. Policies that secure access to community-owned media, community-owned radio, community-owned television stations. Decent housing, preferably cooperatively owned housing. By the way, you know what the biggest public housing project America has been in the last few years? Building prison cells, largely in corporate prisons. The Green Party says that our country should prohibit all corporate-owned prisons. It's not a profit enterprise, it's a public responsibility. Thank you. And the same is true to universal health care. I mean, how long are we going to wait on that one? President Truman proposed it to Congress in 1950, and Congress rebutted him under the influence of the American Medical Association. Here it is 50 years. Every other Western country. We give foreign aid to countries in the third world who have universal health care for their people. Oh, how long are we going to wait? Only as long as the Republican and Democratic parties remain in charge? Is that how long we're going to wait? Let's not wait for that long. It's time. It's time to say once and forever that health care is a right in America, a human right for everyone. And people should not have to go to Canada to buy drugs at half the price made by the same U.S. drug companies who overcharge Americans for drugs higher than any other country in the world. Hey, we got them under our jurisdiction, folks. Let's put the wood to them. Let's have Medicare negotiate down these drug prices the way the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration already do. It's a good idea to also establish community credit unions in the poor areas of our society. That'll deal with the loan sharks, rent-to-own rackets, payday loans. That's the way you deal with the loan sharks, the predatory lending funded by Wall Street investment firms. Community development credit unions, there are 400 of them in the country. They work well. We need 4,000. And the Green Party is determined to do that. We need to extend to our young people more time and attention. We need to afford them what used to be called useful pursuits. Useful pursuits to take their imagination, creativity, and their idealism into new heights of youthful achievement. And these achievements need to be publicized all over the country. Here in the district, Edgar Kahn has started youth courts run by the youth, so they understand what the system of justice and law should be about. Youth court, there's so many good ideas around the country. In Boston, in San Antonio, in Los Angeles, they don't get national coverage because a democracy worth its salt would have its own radio, TV stations, and cable channels. It wouldn't rely so extensively on the commercial media. A commercial media that, to the chagrin of its reporters and fine editors, has trivialized itself, sensationalized itself, standardized itself, homogenized itself, laid off camera crews and reporters, and placed itself in the hands of about 8 giant media conglomerates that control so much of the circulation and the audience throughout this country. We own the public airways. We're the landlords. The radio and TV stations are the tenants. They don't pay us any rent for 70 years. They've gotten our property free. And they decide who says what and who doesn't on television and radio. That cannot continue in a democracy that has any self-respect. I say to you, without the great creation of Brian Lamb's C-SPAN, this gathering would not now be seen all over the United States and in parts of the world. And thank goodness for C-SPAN, but we need more outlets for all people in the country, in the local, state, regional, national levels. I think it's way overdue to begin replacing the call that is often made to the downtrodden and the dispossessed and the poor. It's time to begin replacing the call of, quote, I am somebody, end quote, to we are organized, therefore we are powerful, end quote. A national Marshall Plan for our cities is needed, learning from past mistakes and enlisting new political and civic energies. This must become a central part of our political discourse. This must include a living wage for the 47 million full-time workers, 1 out of every 3 workers who today do not earn a living wage. The federal minimum wage is at $5.15, which is over $2 lower in real purchasing power than the federal minimum wage was in 1968, when the economic output per capita was half what it is today, and when the productivity was 60% less. Who's getting the gains? We know it's the top 10%, and more the top 5%, and more the top 1%. The top 1% of the wealthiest people in this country have wealth equal to the combined wealth of the bottom 95%. And you take the poorest 120 million Americans, and their combined net wealth is equal to the wealth of Bill Gates a year ago. One man. Europeans are astonished when they come here. They get all this U.S. corporate propaganda in Europe saying, hey, Europe, get with it. It's the new information age, the new technology economy. Tear apart your safety net. Do your own welfare reform. Crush your own union efforts. and become like us, because we're making big profits, say these corporations, and pay the CEOs much more than they do in Europe. The bottom 1/3 of the poorest workers in Western European governments make 44% more than the bottom 1/3 in our country. And I say to the people in Europe, take apart that propaganda. Take apart that propaganda and see what happens when you give even more power to giant corporations over your political economy and government than you have thus far. A caveat is in order. We campaign quite a bit in farm country, in rural areas in our country. And notwithstanding a booming economy, farmers can't make a living. The price for wheat, soy, corn, 30–40% lower in 1996, because these giant buyers like Cargill and ADM, they push these prices down to levels that are hardly productive of a simple livelihood. And our farm country and rural country are in deep distress as giant agribusiness, industrial agriculture, factory farming, contract farming, genetically engineered farming, moving in on the farm country. And those of us who are in the cities and suburbs should only read our history to see what will happen to the people in the cities and suburbs if we lose rural America and the small farm economy. And the Green Party strives to preserve that small farm economy and rural America in an independent, self-sustaining agriculture. Allowing workers to form trade unions is a pretty good idea that escapes the Republicans and Democrats. Democrats talk a good game, of course, but are they willing to repeal the notorious Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, which is a chokehold on tens of millions of workers who cannot form unions without huge obstructions, getting fired for just trying to form a trade union in order to lift their standard of living? I have yet to see the Democratic Party take a stand on that. At the platform committee in Los Angeles, the Democratic Party not only turned down a platform saying that they were for universal health care, they turned down a platform that asked them to expand aid to the poor. Can you imagine what they would do if they were offered a repeal of Taft-Hartley? They'd probably swoon by the very prospect of it. This is not the old Democratic Party. This is a hollow party, a party that engages in tens of millions of dollars of fundraising like its counterpart Republican Party, and campaigns with 30-second television ads, and doesn't have any more roots back home, and tells labor unions and minority groups, you can't go to the Republican, you got nowhere to go because we're not as bad as the Republican Party. What a great choice, a choice between the bad and the worst. This country deserves the best. It deserves a broad choice for the people.